Make sure that you are adding comments to the video. Chapter 16. The constable was fat and he was sleepy. He wheezed when he spoke, and he spoke quite a bit as they started off. He and the man in the yellow suit. First, they roused me out of bed in the middle of the night after I'd been out since sunup looking for that child, and now I suppose you're going to try to run me all the way, he said sourly. I gotta tell you, this horse of mine is none too strong. I don't have to hurry her as a rule, so most of the time it doesn't matter. Seems to me we could have waited till dawn anyway. The man in the yellow suit was as courteous as always. The Fosters have been waiting since yesterday morning, he pointed out. Naturally, they're very upset. The sooner we get there, the sooner that child will be with them again. How come you're so deep in it? Asked the constable suspiciously. Maybe you're in cahoots with the kidnappers. How do I know? You should have reported it right off when you saw her get snatched. The man in the yellow suit sighed. But of course I had to find out where they were taking her, he explained patiently. I came right back after that, and the Fosters are friends of mine. They've, sold me their wood. The constable's eye went round. I'll be, he said. What do you know about that? I didn't suppose they'd ever do a thing like that, friend or no friend. They're the first family around here, you know. Proud as peacocks, all of 'em. Family proud, and land proud, too. But they sold off. Did they? Well, well. And he whistled in amazement. They thumped along in silence for a while, out around the wood and across the starlit meadow. Then the constable yawned deeply and said, You ready to tell me how long this is going to take? How far we got to go? 20 miles north, said the man in the yellow suit. The constable groaned. 20 miles? He shifted the shotgun that rested across the saddle and groaned again. Clear up in the foothills? That's a fair way, all right. There was no reply to this. The constable ran his fingers down the gleaming barrel of the shotgun. Stop there and respond to that. Then he shrugged and slumped a little in the saddle. Might as well relax, he wheezed, suddenly compassionable. We'll be riding 3-4 hours. Still there was no reply. Yes, sir, said the constable, trying again. It's something new for these parts. Kidnap. Never had a case like this before that I know of, and been in charge going on 15 years. He waited. You don't say so, his companion said at last. Yep, that's a fact, said the constable, with evident relief. Maybe now there would be some conversation. Yep, 15 years. Seen a lot of trouble in 15 years, but nothing quite like this. Course, there's a first time for everything, as they say. We got a brand new jailhouse. Did you notice? Listen, it's a dandy. Give those folks nice, clean accommodations, he chuckled. Course, they won't be there long. Circuit judge'll be coming through next week. He'll send 'em over to Charlieville, most likely, to the county jail. That's what they do for very serious crimes. Course, we got a gallows of our own if we ever need it. Keeps down trouble, I think, just having it there. Ain't ever used it. That's because they take care of the serious stuff over in Charlieville, like I say. The constable paused to light a cigar and went on cheerfully. What you got planned for this piece of foster land? Going to clear her? Put up a house? Or a store, maybe? No, said the man in the yellow suit. The constable waited for more, but there was no more. His sour mood returned. He frowned and shook the ashes of his cigar. Say, he said, you're kind of a close-lipped feller, ain't you? Stop there, and what do you think the constable's thinking about him right now? The man in the yellow suit narrowed his eyes. His mouth, above the gray, thin beard, twitched with annoyance. Look here, he said tightly. Would you mind if I rode ahead? I'm worried about that child. I'll tell you how to get there, and I'll go on ahead and keep watch. Well, said the constable grudgingly, all right, if you're in such a ding-dang hurry, but don't do nothing till I get there. Those folks are likely dangerous. I'll try to keep up. But this horse of mine, she's none too strong. Don't see as how I could get her to a gallop, even if I tried. That's right, said the man in the yellow suit. So I'll go ahead and wait outside the house till you get there. He explained the route carefully, then dug his heels into the flanks of the fat old horse, cantering off into the distant darkness, where just a hint of dawn glowed on the edges of the hills far ahead. The constable chewed on the end of the cigar. "Humph," he said to the horse. "Did you get a gander of that suit of clothes?" "Oh, well, it takes all kinds, as they say," and he followed slowly after, yawning. The gap between him and the man ahead lengthened with every mile. Now, if you have time, go to your book creator and add a scene to this. Chapter 17. For the second morning in a row, Winnie Foster woke early. Outside, in the ring of trees around the pond, the birds were celebrating, giving the new day a brass band's worth of greeting. Winnie freed herself from the twisted quilt and went to the window. Mist lay on the surface of the water, and the light was still pale. It looked unreal, and she felt herself unreal, waking where she had, with her hair wild and her dress all crumpled. She rubbed her eyes. Through the dewy weeds below the window, a toad hopped suddenly into view, and Winnie peered at it eagerly. But no, of course it wasn't the same toad. And remembering the other toad, her toad, she thought now, almost fondly, it seemed to her that she had been away from home for weeks. Then she heard a step on the loft stairs and thought, "Jessie!" At once, her cheeks flamed. What does that mean? She's kind of has a crush on him, I think. But it was Miles. He came into the parlor, and when he saw she was up, he smiled and whispered, "Good, you're awake. Come on, you can help me catch some fish for breakfast." This time Winnie was careful not to make a noise when she climbed into the rowboat. She made her way to her seat in the stern, and Miles handed her 2 old cane poles. "Watch out for the hooks," he warned, and a jar of bait. Pork fat cut into little pieces. A big brown night moth fluttered out from under the oar blades, propped beside her on the seat, and wobbled off toward nowhere through the fragrant air. And from the bank, something plopped into the water. A frog! Winnie caught just a glimpse of it as it scissored away from shore. The water was so clear that she could see tiny brown fish near the bottom, flickering this way and that. Miles pushed the rowboat off and sprang in, and soon they were gliding up toward the rear end of the pond, where the water came in from the stream. The locks grated as the oars dipped and swung, but Miles was skillful. He rowed without a single splash. The dripping of the blades as they lifted sent rows of overlapping circles spreading silently behind them. It was very peaceful. They'll take me home today, thought Winnie. She was somehow certain of this, and began to feel quite cheerful. She had been kidnapped, but nothing bad had happened, and now it was almost over. Now, remembering the visits of the night before, she smiled, and found that she loved them. This most peculiar family. They were her friends, after all, and hers alone. "How'd you sleep?" Miles asked her. "All right," she said. "That's good, I'm glad. Ever been fishing before?" "No," she told him. "You'll like it, it's fun," and he smiled at her. The mist was lifting now as the sun poked up above the trees and the water sparkled. Miles guided the rowboat near a spot where the lily pads lay like upturned palms on the surface. "You'll let her drift here some," he said. "We'll let her drift here some. There'll be trout down in those weeds and stems. Here, give me the poles, and I'll bait the hooks for us." Winnie sat watching him as he worked. His face was like Jessie's, and yet not like. It was thinner without Jessie's round cheeks, and paler, and his hair was almost straight, clipped neatly below the ears. His hands were different, too, the fingers thicker, the skin scrubbed looking, like black at the knuckles and under the nails. Winnie remembered that that he worked sometimes as a blacksmith, and indeed his shoulders, under his threadbare shirt, were broad and muscled. He looked solid like an oar, whereas Jessie, well, she decided Jessie was like water, thin and quick. Miles seemed to sense that she was watching him. He looked up from the bait jar, and his eyes, returned to her gaze, were soft. "Remember, I told you I had 2 children?" he asked. "Well, one of them was a girl. I took her fishing, too." His face clouded then, and he shook his head. "Her name was Anna. Lord, how sweet she was, that child. It's queer to think she'd be close to 80 now, if she's still alive. And my son, he'd be 82. Winnie looked at his young, strong face, and after a moment she said, "Why didn't you take them to the spring and give them some of the special water?" Stop there and respond. What are your thoughts? "Well, of course, we didn't realize about the spring while we were still on the farm," said Miles. "Afterwards, I thought about going to find them. I wanted to, heaven knows. But Winnie, how would it have been if I had? My wife was nearly 40 by then, and the children, well, what was the use? They'd have been nearly grown themselves. They'd have had a pa close to the same age they was. No, it'd all have been so mixed up and peculiar, it just wouldn't have worked. Then Pa, as he was dead set against it anyway, the fewer people know about the spring, he says, the fewer people are to tell about it. Here's your pole. Just ease the hook down in the water. You'll know when you get a bite." Winnie clutched her pole, sitting sideways in the stern, and watched the baited hooks sink slowly down. A dragonfly, a brilliant blue jewel, darted up and paused over the lily pads, then swung up and away. From the nearest bank, a bullfrog spoke. "There certainly are a lot of frogs around here," Winnie observed. "That's so," said Miles. "They'll keep coming, too, as long as the turtles stay away. Snappers now. They'll eat a frog soon as look at him." Winnie thought about this peril of the frogs and sighed. "It'd be nice," she said, "if nothing ever had to die." "Well, now, I don't know," said Miles. "If you think of it, you come to see, there'd be so many creatures, including you. We'd all be squeezed in right up next to each other before long." Winnie squinted at her fishing line and tried to picture a teeming world. She said. "Yes, I guess you're right." Suddenly, the cane pole jerked in her hands and bent into an arch. Its tip dragged nearly to the water's surface. Winnie held on tight by the handle, her eyes wide. "Hey!" cried Miles. "Look there, you got a bite. Fresh trout for breakfast, Winnie." But just as suddenly, the pole whipped straight again, and the line went slack. "Shucks," said Miles, "it got away." "I'm kind of glad," Winnie admitted, easing her rigid grip on the butt of the pole. "You fish, Miles. I'm not so sure I want to." And so they drifted for a little longer. The sky was blue and hard now. The last of the mist dissolved, and the sun, stepping higher above the trees, was hot on Winnie's back. The first week of August was reasserting itself after a good night's sleep. It would be another searing day. A mosquito appeared and sat down on Winnie's knee. She slapped at it absently, thinking about what Miles had said, and all the mosquitoes live forever, and if they kept on having babies, it would be terrible. The Tucks were right. It was best if no one knew about the spring, including the mosquitoes. She would keep the secret. She looked at Miles, and then she asked him, "What will you do if you've got so much time?" "Someday," said Miles, I'll find a way to do something important." Winnie nodded. She was what she wanted. That was what she wanted. "The way I see it," Miles went on, "it's no good hiding yourself away, like Pa and lots of other people. It's no good just thinking of your own pleasure, either. People got to do something useful if they're going to take up space in the world." "But what will you do?" Winnie persisted. "I don't know yet," said Miles. "I ain't had no schooling or nothing, and that makes it hard." Then he set his jaw and added, "I'll find a way, though. I'll locate something." Winnie nodded. She reached out and ran her fingers across a lily pad that lay on the water beside the boat. It was warm and very dry, like a blotter, but near its center was a single drop of water, round and perfect. She touched the drop and brought her fingertip back wet. But the drop of water, though it rolled a little, remained round and perfect as before. And then Miles caught a fish. There it flopped in the bottom of the boat, its jaw working, its gills fanning rapidly. Winnie drew up her knees and stared at it. It was beautiful and horrible, too, with gleaming, rainbow-colored scales and an eye like marble, beginning to dim even as she watched it. The hook was caught in its upper lip, and suddenly Winnie wanted to weep. "Put it back, Miles," she said, her voice dry and harsh. "Put it back right away. Stop and give me your thoughts there. I know who this sounds like. Miles started to protest, and then, looking at her face, he picked up the trout and gently worked the barbed hook free. All right, Mary. Just kidding. He said. He dropped the fish over the edge of the boat. It flipped its tail and disappeared under the lily pads. Will it be all right? Asked Winnie, feeling foolish and happy both at once. It'll be all right, Miles assured her. And then he said, people got to be meat eaters sometimes, though. It's the natural way. And that means killing things. I know, said Winnie weakly, but still. Yes, said Miles, I know.